So we take it for granted that people and mammals are all laterally symmetric, left hand, right hand, that kind of thing. And in fact, almost all animals are, except a few exceptions like snails. In a sense, I'm an exception also. About 10% of the people I meet will eventually say, did you ever know that you have one green eye and one brown eye? And so, having heard that quite a few times, I finally decided to investigate it. So it turns out that although my left eye is mostly brown and my right eye is mostly green, both eyes are actually variegated. And so you can see that this is brown and this is mostly green, and this is mostly brown and this is a little green. And so since we're quantifying, if you measure the colors in these regions, it turns out the most useful way to do this is by what's called the hue, saturation, and brightness. Brightness is a function of the illumination. Hue and saturation are largely independent of how much light you have. So if you plot hue, which is what the color is, and saturation, which is how strong it is, how intense, then it turns out you get the brown pigment over here and the green pigment over here. Actually, our eyes really only have one kind of pigment, which is called melanin, which is brown. And blue eyes are the absence of pigment. It's just, that's the way the muscle fibers reflect light and scatter it. Makes it look blue. And if you have an intermediate amount of pigment, it could be green or hazel all the way to brown. And the important thing is there's a big difference between the brown pigment, the brown part of the iris, and the green part. And so what would be the genetic basis for that? In a recent excellent paper in genetics, there are actually 10 genes that affect eye color, and they affect them roughly in the size that is represented here. Actually, I say roughly because HER2 is about 100 times more important than the other genes. So, given the large difference that you saw between brown and green, it's probably HER2, the HER2 gene, which is being different in the two parts of my irises. So what does that mean? Well, a little history here. I started out as an embryo once upon a time, and the embryo at this stage is about the size of a fat period at the end of a sentence. The first major organ system to form is the nervous system. It starts out as a plate, and then the plate rolls up into a tube, and then bulges appear on the side that will become the two eyes. Sort of like a glass bowl blowing bubbles out of it, the sides of the tube. So the important thing is, since there's brown and green pigment in both eyes, the precursor, the one cell where the switch got flipped, must have been very early on, and since about 50% of my irises are blue and 50% are green, the precursor must have been at a stage when at least the parts that was going to become the developing nervous system consisted of only 2 or 3 cells. Probably a very early stage in development, because it crossed the middle. That's the most important. And so what kind of event might that be? Well, this is what's called a somatic mutation. It's not that you develop a mutation because of something during the formation of germ cells. It's rather that once you have a fertilized egg and you start to develop, one of the Xerox machine breaks and you make a mistake in copy. And this can be a point mutation in, say, the HERV2 gene. It could be the result of some kind of transposable element. It could be turning a regulatory gene on or off. These two would perhaps affect several different genes, whereas this would affect a single gene. There's also a possibility that I could be a chimera, 2 completely different genetic individuals that somehow fuse, but that's highly unlikely. So, as a way of investigating this, I wondered if there were any other asymmetric features. And one of them is an eyebrow which is higher on the right side than on the left side. Also, you notice the fold of skin over the eyelid is higher on that side also. And so that turned out not to be a terribly fruitful line of investigation, because I happen to have, from several years ago, a CAT scan. This is moving the scan down from the top of my head and look for any asymmetry. At this point you see a little bit, but it's probably not very significant. And so the bottom line, a scan through the eyes looks perfectly symmetric. So I think probably my guess, if I were to guess, is that this is a point mutation that affects only one gene, and the pigment cells in the iris as well as in the eye produce retinol in the adult, and in the embryo, retinol is a morphogen, a substance that affects the growth of cells nearby. So that the difference in the orbit may be a secondary effect. So there you go.
We have time for one or two questions.
I think you have to pay a lot of attention to lighting. The pupils were asymmetric in the photograph.
Yeah, very good point. And my camera was obviously not the best. It was my cell phone. Not really.
Repeat the question.
Yeah. My eyebrows seem matched according to my ears. Well, the ears may not match either, but the eyebrows certainly, one isn't very definitely.
Have you considered getting any like sort of gene mapping on a number of your cells to see if you could have a chimeric hybrid that way?
I'm waiting till it gets cheaper. I would obviously have to map not just once, but several times. And how do I know which part is which? Unless I'm not prepared to give them a sample of my iris.
Great, well, thank you so much. So,